Right, Della Reynolds.
Lovely, thank you. And Della, could you please give me a brief background about how you came to be here today, what it is that you do?
I'm here today at the IPSIS meeting. I was invited in my role as coordinator of the PHSO pressure group. A large number of individuals who've gone through the complaint system, then through the second tier complaint system to the Ombudsman and been badly let down. We've all found that it's impossible to hold the Ombudsman to account, and we've combined together to make a pressure group so that the Ombudsman can be reformed, and primarily so that in the new reformed Ombudsman there is accountability, so that if your complaint is handled really poorly, you have some means of redress. And that's where we exist. 2/3 of the complaints are NHS and 1/3 would be parliamentary.
And thinking about those 2/3 being NHS complaints, what's the, if there is, sort of an average journey that those people may have been on before they arrive with you?
The journey to us, the pressure group, is long and arduous. It's usually started 2-3 years, possibly before they discover that we exist. They've been through the first stage of complaint handling, where naively they thought they'd made a straightforward complaint, that something had gone wrong and that it would be handled and steps would be taken to put it right. And fundamentally that's all people want at the beginning. They want to be heard and acknowledged. They want to be reassured that it won't happen to anyone else, and then they want closure. Quite often there's a bereavement, not always, but quite often there's a bereavement, and people want to be able to get on with their lives, to grieve for the person who's lost and to put their lives back on an even keel. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen because they get caught up in the complaint system at the first tier level, which can last for a year or more. Having then dug in through that process and achieved nothing, they feel that they will approach the Ombudsman, who is set up as an independent and impartial body, that they will give them remedy and justice and closure. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen there either. So by the time they find the pressure group, usually just from internet searches, they're very disillusioned, completely exhausted. Driving forward a complaint is endless hours of hard work. You must find all the evidence yourself. You must continually drive the process forward, asking questions: what's happening, what's happening now. You must go through all the reports in detail, picking out all the errors and the factual mistakes and put them right. It's a totally draining process, and often on the back of a bereavement which they still haven't properly grieved for. Now when they find the pressure group and they read the information on the website, which is PHSOtheFACTS, the PHSOtheFACTS tells you what really happens when you go to the Ombudsman. That's the purpose of it. And suddenly they go, thank goodness you're here. I thought it was me. I thought I'd just not explain myself clearly. Now I can see how it works. Some people then go on to join the pressure group. Others simply request information or advice.
So when people come to you, they're obviously disillusioned, frustrated, exhausted. How do they feel that they have been, I want to say treated, for want of a better word, during their, trying to get to the complaints procedure?
The complaints process makes you feel as though you are the one to blame. It starts with the fact that as a carer, quite possibly either for an elderly person or possibly for a child with health issues, mental health issues, as a carer you have put your trust in the authorities to care for your relative. You may have questioned along the way, but on the whole you listened to the advice of the doctors and nurses and you took it and you thought everything would be fine. Then the traumatic event happens, the death usually, or harm to the person, the loved one. At that point you start to ask more questions, and that is when the point of disillusionment sets in, because those questions are continually blocked. You ask to see evidence, you ask to see records, you ask to see details of the people who've administered the drugs or the care, and it's all blocked from you. So what happens is you start from the point of your own personal guilt, that you trusted your loved one to those authorities, to those in authority, and they let you down. You now feel a sense of obligation to the person you've lost to put it right. So you must put it right for their memory, for their sake, and for those that follow after. Now that's a really powerful emotion. And when you find you're unable to put it right, even though you've knocked on every door, nobody has listened, it's not been acknowledged, it's not been put right, then what you have is you have your original guilt combined with a sense of helplessness. And this works together to usually trigger depression. So you'll get depression, post-traumatic stress disorders. You've also lost trust, faith in the system. You can't believe that you've been treated so badly, that you've been lied to. Quite often the way to avoid handling the investigation properly is to in some way blame you for your own neglect, and that really doesn't help the process at all. So you've got a whole cocktail of emotion going on there. And of course when you get to the end of the ombudsman, you're at the end of the road. So they say, case closed, we're sorry you still disagree with our decision, you'll have to go to judicial review. So then it means another year of court proceedings, cost, employing a solicitor, regurgitating your complaint from beginning to end with a new person and a new body. Many people just don't last the course. They just drop out somewhere along the way. But the idea that when people retract a case or they don't see it through to the end, the idea that they have somehow moved on is a false one. They don't move on. They're licking wounds. And those wounds have got no means of healing. There's no closure. So they just continually lick the wounds that, their mother died in awful care, and they know that other people's mothers are doing the same. So the whole concept of moving on is a fake one. You don't ever move on.
Thinking about how we shape plans for this new safety function, and everything that you heard this morning about why it's been created, and everything that you do with your work on why it needs to be created. What do you, from what you've heard, what do you think is immediately relevant that you think will stands out for you?
In NHS complaint handling, there are already 70 different bodies who could be part of a complaint. What happens is that they play a kind of not in our remit game. So one will look at one aspect but not another, and nobody will take the whole investigation on, and nobody will take responsibility for really seeing it through till the end. So by creating another new body, we've got to be very clear about the remit of this new body, this IPSIS. And when you look at all the regulatory systems that exist so far, the two weaknesses appear to be that they've got no statutory responsibility themselves to take action. So you can't hold them to account if they fail. And there's also no way of them having found some wrongdoing or some harm. None of them seem to be able to monitor the action plan or the sanctions, or so they haven't got sufficient powers to drive reform and put things right. And equally, they don't have responsibility, so they can simply say to you that's not for us to investigate, or we can only investigate this part. And if you try to hold them to account, that you can't do it. So the new body, the new IPSIS body, has to be very clear about what its remit is to the public, and how the public can hold IPSIS to account if it fails to deliver. And then that model needs to go through all the other regulatory bodies.
Thank you, that's very clear. What do you think the function needs to do to ensure that patients and families and carers and the people that you end up talking to, but hopefully wouldn't, but what do you think they need to do in order to make sure that they feel like they've got support when things go wrong?
When people first make a complaint, it's quite often the first time they've ever made a complaint. We're still really quite reluctant to make complaints here. We do so because possibly we've got unanswered questions. We want to understand what happened, what went wrong. And we do so out of a sense of responsibility to others, that it won't happen again, because we're appreciating our own trauma and we want to prevent that from happening. So what people want at that first stage is they want to be listened to, and they want to be acknowledged, and they want to know that they've been heard. And that is supportive. What happens is that there's a process of damage limitation that kicks in. So as the complainant makes their complaint, various parts of it will be hived off as irrelevant or caused by them, because they should have said something sooner, maybe, this kind of thing. So as the various excuses come in, then people feel they're not being heard, they're not being acknowledged. And that's when the frustration comes in. So people aren't usually angry at the beginning, but as they work their way through the complaint system, they become increasingly angry at the way their words are being twisted, the facts are being twisted, they're not getting the answers, people are being let off the hook. And those who stay the course tend to be accused of being vexatious at one point or another for simply asking the same questions again and again in the hope of getting the answers this time, and going from one body to another in hope that one body will answer the question the other body hasn't. So you run that risk then of being labelled vexatious, in which case nobody has to deal with you because you're clearly a mad person by then. So this is how the system works against you. You start off quite rational. You know what you've seen. You know what you've witnessed. Usually you are the only witness. And yet somehow one body after another fail to listen and acknowledge. You start to doubt your own sanity until you realise that it happens to other people as well. So to support patients and carers, listening, acknowledging, accepting, apologising. Apologising at the beginning is so much more effective than apologising 3 years down the line. When you've forced it out of them like blood out of a stone, you finally get that apology. Well, it's not worth anything. It's not genuine. So an apology at the beginning, a genuine apology, and the the statement that it won't happen again, that steps will be taken, it will be looked into. These are the things that people will be supported by.
Okay, in terms of the investigations themselves, the new function wants to ensure that investigations are high quality, robust and fair. Again, what would give patients, families and carers the confidence that they are high quality, robust and fair? Do you think?
The first problem when you start an investigation is access to evidence. Without the evidence, an investigation is not robust or fair. As soon as an incident happens, all the documentation and the medical records should be sealed and made safe. That's not what happens at the moment. So if IPSIS have the power, as soon as they are contacted and start an investigation, they should be able to have access immediately to all the medical records, all the data, all the information, and it should be put to one side. They shouldn't have to get it piecemeal, one bit at a time, with years apart between one piece of information and another piece of information. What complainants have to do is they have to find that evidence through data release. So they have to ask a question, they have to wait 40 working days, they have to then find that some of it's been redacted or some of it's been denied due to an exemption. They then have to apply again using a different format. It's a continual process of trying to get the evidence out of the body in order to get the investigation up and running. Now, if IPSIS have the powers, say the powers of a High Court judge to demand that all the evidence is supplied in one go at a point in time, and that anything is left is then a breach, possibly a criminal act even, if evidence is deliberately either destroyed or hidden, then you're going to start with a basis where you can have a robust investigation. When half of the facts are missing. So one of the things that happens with the Ombudsman is that the patient will ask for the medical records. The Ombudsman will then ask for a copy of the medical records. The Ombudsman will not share with the complainant the medical records they've seen because the investigation is in private. The decision is made, and the decision might be not to uphold. At that point, the complainant asks to see all the evidence that the Ombudsman used to support their decision. When they see the medical records, they find out half of them are missing, all the important ones the Ombudsman didn't see. But by now the decision has been made. The Ombudsman has decided there's no maladministration. It's very difficult to overturn that decision now. So right from the beginning, the investigation team at IPSIS need to secure all the evidence. They need to double check it then with the complainant against their evidence and make sure that there's nothing missing or that nothing's been altered in the meantime. And then if they start off from the basis that the evidence is fair and an honest account of what happened, then you stand a chance of having a fair and honest investigation. But if the evidence is either tampered with or absent, you can't get anywhere.
You've talked quite a lot about some of the learnings and aspects that should change. What would you say is the biggest learning that you would like to share with the people forming IPSIS?
I think everybody is aware now that for many years complaint handling has not been effective. Thousands of people have been denied answers to their questions, justice and remedy. Thousands and thousands of people. Some of who are survivors and they turn up to meetings and they have their voice heard. Most of whom you'll never hear from. Some of them broken. They're broken. They're damaged by the process, permanently damaged. Some of them go on to be patients themselves, having to sign on for mental health care because of the poor complaint handling. So I don't think anyone's under any illusion how important it is to get complaint handling right for the people who are putting the complaint forward in the first place. So the one side of the picture is that those people must be listened to, their complaint must be acknowledged and not denied, and they must see the process is transparent and fair and robust, and they get answers to their questions and they get some remedy. You can't put a lot of things right, but remedy where it can be done, and closure. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is poor complaint handling allows issues to continue. It does not drive reform. When the Ombudsman fails to uphold maladministration, no action is taken against the trust or the GP, nothing. If maladministration is not there, then there is no action plan, there is no request to alter behaviour. Because it's so difficult to prove maladministration, they upheld in the last year, 35% of the complaints that came. So basically, 2/3 of the people who put in a complaint to the Ombudsman go away with nothing. Not only do they go away with nothing, but the bodies they complained about go away with no improvement. And so whatever happened to them is there, and it's open, and it will happen again. And this, of course, costs money as much as anything else, because then a new complaint will be generated further down the line of exactly the same things happening as before. So it's not cost effective. So the complaint must resolve for the individual, but it must drive reform so that that particular complaint doesn't occur again.
Which brings me nicely into my next question, which is how does the function ensure that learnings that are created out of investigations when they do happen are integrated into best practice to ensure that these incidents are less likely to happen again in the future?
Yeah, and ensuring that learning comes from a complaint is really key to the whole system. It's you close the circle. You start the circle with a complaint. The complaint is then investigated. From that investigation, there is some learning. The learning is then put in as an action plan or a series of policy changes into an organisation, and then it's monitored. It's monitored to see if the action that was taken is effective to stop that complaint happening again. So what's happening at the moment is you have the complaint, you have the investigations, most of which are too poor to really identify the actual cause. But even the ones that are upheld, there is no body that is presently monitoring the effectiveness of any action plans or modifications. So it goes back into the trust. The trust are struggling with quite a lot of initiatives at that time, maybe short of staff, short of money, lots of other things going on. They've got an action plan that they've got to change policies or procedures in a certain way. It's not prioritised. Nobody's checking it. Nobody's going to come in and say, it's 6 weeks, what have you done? It's 6 months, is it still working? Without the monitoring to ensure that, first of all, the action plan was the appropriate one, that it has met the need, and secondly, that that issue is now resolved. Without that monitoring, there is no learning. It's simply another piece of paper in another file on a dusty shelf. And the whole process was really a waste of time and money.
And do you think that monitoring post-investigation and recommendation is part of the IPSIS remit, or should be part of the IPSIS remit?
I think the IPSIS remit should be able to enforce an action plan. That's what's missing with the Ombudsman. They can make a recommendation, but they cannot enforce that the recommendation is taken up. So they must have stronger powers to say this recommendation must be taken up and give some kind of time bonding that says when the action should be met. But I don't think it's IPSIS' role to then monitor the effectiveness of that, because I think that would take them away from their core purpose, which is investigate and to find out what went wrong. There were lots of other people waiting in the queue ready for their answers. So the monitoring role should probably go to somebody like CQC. So they feed in that if at a certain trust it's been found that their lack of communication has led to an incident, then the chances are that that lack of communication may exist in a lot of trusts, not just the one investigated. So what would happen is you would put in a new guideline to say communication must be strengthened in the following ways. That would go to CQC, who would monitor the particular trust it was applied to, but then monitor every other trust for that issue of communication to make sure that their systems do not allow the same mistake to happen. So I think the monitoring role would come down to CQC.
Okay. Which information about IPSIS and the organisation structure would give you the most confidence in the organisation? Some examples might be independence or external assessment, a patient voice.
For me, the things that would give me most confidence is genuine independence. Many organisations are labelled independent, but in the end of the day, they're not independent. Genuine independence would mean that they could deliver bad news to wherever it needed to be delivered without any comeback. If they're not genuinely independent, then a vested interest of some kind or another will prevent that bad news from being delivered. And then you know that the independence is skewed. Genuine independence, and secondly, the ability to hold them to account. So if they fail to deliver, if their investigation process is weak, if their sanctions are inappropriate, whatever they do, they must have a clear set of guidelines about what it is they do and how they do it, so you can measure against their, like a service charge or something like that. And then there must be a mechanism by which you hold the body to account. Now, the problem with independence is it doesn't match very well with accountability, because if they're independent, then who holds them to account? And this is where it's a balancing act, and you have to get the seesaw right. Somebody has to hold IPSIS to account, but at the same time not be so influential that they interfere with their independence. That's a tough one to crack. So I think the suggestion has been that it's a select committee. But it shouldn't be the Department of Health. I don't think it's too close to government.
And then just a summing up question. Thinking about everything we've discussed today, what feels most important to you, and what would you particularly like to highlight? What would be the one thing you'd like to tell the people designing IPSIS?
If I had a single message, it would be fair. This is the bit that's missing. I think Mike Durkin today spoke about honesty and trust, and I can't remember the other one now. And they are the key concepts really. When you bring your complaint, you want it to be honestly dealt with. You want to have trust in the organisation. Oh, and the third one was respect. Respect for the person bringing the complaint. Respect for the families and the impacts it's had on everybody. So honesty, trust and respect. That Mike Durkin started the day with that, and that is where the heart of it is. Those three things have to be there.
Thank you. Have you got something from today? Have you benefited from today? Is it what you expected?
Yes. I always benefit from any of these discussions. It helps to clarify your own thinking. I think that networking, meeting with other people who are coming at a slightly different angle to you, is very valuable, because you've all got a slice of the view, and then when you put it together with somebody else's slice who's come possibly from the NHS themselves or from a slightly different role, then your view widens, and the more you understand the process, then the easier it is for everybody to see what's going wrong and how to put it right. So yeah, it's been very valuable.